We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs.
Of course, as Dmitry Peskov said, we want to understand what's really behind this statement. There used to be 50 days, and then 24 hours, and 100 days as well. We've been through all of that, and we really do want to understand what motivates the President of the United States. It's clear that he is under enormous, I would even say indecent, pressure from the European Union and the current NATO leadership, who are brazenly supporting Zelenskyy's demands to keep supplying him with modern, including offensive, weapons at the increasing expense of taxpayers in Western countries. We've already had an unprecedented number of sanctions imposed against us.
We would like to ask you to comment on Trump's statement about Ukraine yesterday. Are we, after what was said yesterday in Washington, still prepared to continue dialogue with the U.S. on normalizing bilateral relations and resolving the Ukrainian conflict? And, if I may, one more follow-up question. How do we assess the threat of 100% tariffs being imposed on our trading partners from the perspective of Russia's foreign economic interests? Maybe you managed to discuss this.
In my opinion, that's really the same question, because the statement was specifically about 100%. Generally speaking, as a matter of principle, we never pursue a course that would in any way harm our national interests or compromise the security and well-being of the country. Break time equals 0.5s/. And the special military operation is aimed precisely at this, to eliminate at the root, in its infancy, those threats that the North Atlantic Alliance has been creating right on our borders, not just for a day or a year, but for decades. And Russia has issued repeated warnings. The President has devoted countless speeches and statements to this issue, and unfortunately, he was not heard. But apparently, this only confirms what he said recently. President Putin, in his interview with Pavel Zarubin, spoke about how his and our collective perception of relations with the West has evolved. At first, it seemed that if we just removed the ideological differences, everything would be fine. But then it turned out that the issue wasn't ideology at all, and that the West has always been driven by only one thing: geopolitical containment, suppression, or even direct military destruction of Russia, regardless of what ideology was practiced in the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, or post-Soviet Russia, as has happened more than once in history. That's why, of course, as Dmitry Peskov said, we want to understand what's really behind this statement. There used to be 50 days, and then 24 hours, and 100 days as well. We've been through all of that, and we really do want to understand what motivates the President of the United States. It's clear that he is under enormous, I would even say indecent, pressure from the European Union and the current NATO leadership, who are brazenly supporting Zelenskyy's demands to keep supplying him with modern, including offensive, weapons at the increasing expense of taxpayers in Western countries. So, you know, we have a saying, don't dig a pit for someone else. And as for the sanctions that the European Union has now imposed, and the new ones being prepared in Brussels, they're trying to drag the United States into this sanctions vortex as well. But President Trump explained very clearly that it will be Europe that ends up paying for all of this. All of this, of course, has already caused very serious damage to the European economy. Sensible and objective European analysts, economists, and political scientists admit that the main party suffering from this sanctions war is, first and foremost, its initiator. As for us, we've already had an unprecedented number of sanctions imposed against us. We're managing. I have no doubt whatsoever that we will cope. This conclusion is also based on assessments and analysis by independent, including many Western economists and politicians. So, as for yes, our trading partners, they hear what has been said, but it's unlikely they can now predict their own actions. They have obligations, international obligations. And knowing about these partners of ours, I don't see how they can abandon their independent policy, their policy of honoring agreements reached both through bilateral channels.
You mentioned that Moscow wants to understand where Trump's statements are coming from. And actually, even before Trump, American Senator Lindsey Graham said pretty much the same thing, that Russia, well, actually Brazil, China, and India are playing into Putin's hands. And you have already stated that Moscow does not possess any particular significant concerns about its various partners, but I truly wanted to inquire, is there any genuine potential for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, or the BRICS group to undertake joint coordinated action regarding, well, this specific kind of emerging threat?
Well, since there have been specific threats coming from Washington directed at BRICS, saying that BRICS needs to be fought against, that BRICS undermines the interests of the United States. But to be fair, I have to say, earlier, President Trump expressed a somewhat different point of view. He said directly that the actions taken by the Biden administration, using the dollar as a weapon, have caused irreparable damage to the reputation of this global reserve currency. And I am sure that he understands the fairness of that assessment. And the fact that, in response to the lawlessness of the previous administration, both BRICS, the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, and many others are seeking alternative payment methods that are not tied to the dollar, thereby protecting themselves from Washington's arbitrariness. This process can no longer be stopped, and there are statistics showing what the share of the dollar in global trade and international financial settlements looks like now. It's not because we wanted to run away from the dollar. President Putin has emphasized this more than once. It was the dollar that was chosen as a tool to punish those whose behavior Americans consider inconsistent with those very same infamous rules by which they want to maintain the entire world order. But if we're talking seriously about concerns, our profession is not to be afraid. Our profession is to ensure that Russian interests are taken into account, to work openly and honestly, based on international law and agreed upon principles. A self-respecting, strong, and independent state simply cannot act otherwise. And we have, I want to emphasize this once again, every reason to believe that the states that are part of BRICS are also sovereign and value their position in the global system.
The organizers say, next network, so we have two final questions. Please. Nikolai Ivanov, Izvestia International Research Center. Sergei Viktorovich. American media claim that the United States is now literally forcing its allies Japan and Australia to decide how they will help Taiwan in the event of a conflict. In parallel, the United States and allies from 18 countries are beginning the largest exercises in Australia. Tens of thousands of military personnel are involved there. What do you think is behind this new surge of tension in the region?
Well, it's not a new surge. It might be a new phase of the very same surge that began quite a few years ago, when the United States put forward the idea of developing and implementing the so-called Indo-Pacific strategies. By Indo-Pacific, they actually mean the Asia-Pacific region, which has always been called that and has never suffered because of it. But the Indo-Pacific strategy symbolized NATO countries' desire to expand their infrastructure into the Far East, into the Southeast Asian and Northeast Asian regions, to create alliances there with a nuclear component, like the AUKUS Alliance, United States, Britain, and Australia, or the trio of the US, South Korea, and Japan, who are conducting increasingly frequent and large-scale exercises, also with a nuclear element. And there are many others, like the so-called Indo-Pacific Four, overseen by the United States, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. And all of this is accompanied by NATO infrastructure moving eastward, including in such dangerous forms as the transfer of intermediate and shorter-range missiles to the Philippines, land-based missiles that were previously banned by the Russian-American Treaty. This is a very, very serious weapon that will appear for the first time in Southeast Asia. It's also moving into Europe, including Germany, by the way. So the whole process reflects NATO's aggressive eastward expansion. They wanted to absorb Ukraine, stumbled, but continue to pretend that they will definitely see it through to the end. And at the same time, as they use Ukraine as the spearhead of their attacks against Russia, although these attacks are becoming less and less noticeable. At the same time, they are also advancing eastward, so their desire is to ensure NATO control over the security situation across the entire Eurasian continent, instead of the constructive alternatives that we, the People's Republic of China, and our other allies and like-minded partners are promoting, namely, the creation, as I have already said, of an architecture of Eurasian security that is open, equal, and provides for the participation of all continental countries of Eurasia without exception. That's it. Now, specifically about Taiwan. You know, there are more and more speculations and provocations regarding the Taiwan issue. For example, not so long ago, when someone from the journalists drew President Macron's attention to the logic I just described, he said something along the lines of, NATO will not interfere in Asian affairs if China ensures that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea does not interfere in European affairs. What do you think about that? And if Russia is allowed, as Macron suggests, to take control over part of Ukraine, then what could happen to Taiwan? These are blatantly provocative statements. The West keeps assuring the People's Republic of China that it adheres to the One China policy and principle, but at the same time immediately adds that the status quo must not be touched. And the status quo, as we see it, means that the West interacts with Taiwan as if it were an independent state, arms it, and in every possible way emphasizes all the other attributes of independence.
Thank you. The permanent representative of Ukraine to the UN.
Is that you? I thought you were introducing yourself.
Nikita Kornentev, NTV Company. Sorry. The permanent representative of Ukraine to the UN, Kislitsia, stated that the Istanbul negotiation format has practically exhausted itself. Is this some kind of bargaining tactic, maybe a way to bring President Vladimir Putin and Zelenskyy closer to meeting? Or is the Istanbul format once again on pause?
Well, Kislitsia is no longer the permanent representative to the UN. I think he's even a deputy minister now. Although, of course, he made his reputation specifically as the ambassador to the United Nations. Zelenskyy also said that the Istanbul format is not serious. I think someone else from his team made similar statements, and the argument was very simple. They don't discuss anything except humanitarian issues, prisoner exchanges, returning the bodies of the dead, and bringing back wounded soldiers. But if they think that this format has outlived its usefulness, it just once again confirms their careless attitude toward their own citizens. Just like they haven't wanted to return bodies to relatives for a long time to save money, just like they shot down our plane that was carrying prisoners for exchange some time ago. And this, in general, is the true face of the Ukrainian regime. But we shouldn't forget that they're being deceitful. Because aside from humanitarian issues, which are of course important, these are matters that concern people and their families, their loved ones. But aside from these humanitarian issues, during the second round of these negotiations, our delegation handed over a draft agreement, a draft in the form of a memorandum, while the Ukrainians submitted their own memorandum draft. Yes, they are completely opposite. At the request of the Americans, we discussed this with them at the expert level. How do we see this being resolved? The answer was very simple. Despite the diametrically opposed positions, in April 2022 in Istanbul, we actually managed to reach an agreement, not just on a ceasefire, but on a settlement, on the principles of a settlement that were proposed by Ukraine and were acceptable to the Russian Federation.